Hey everyone, Bob Troia here from QuantifiedBob.com. I'm excited to be at Biohacking Congress event here in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's been an amazing weekend. I think there were like over 30 speakers and over 30 exhibitors showing off the latest in cool tech and products here. They're going to do another event in June. I think it's the 11th and 12th. And I was just told recently that I think it's open to the public for free. So there's no excuse to not attend it this year. So I think if you haven't been to one, definitely come because you're going to see some amazing speakers, such as who I have here, sitting here next to me, Dr. Nathan Bryan. So Nathan, did I call you?
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
So he is the go-to guy, the expert in all things nitric oxide. And you may have heard the term nitric oxide. I know a lot of the breathwork people are always talking about it, but we want to dig into it and understand a little bit more about it and why it is important. So maybe let's start. Like, what is nitric oxide and why is it important to us?
Yeah, very good question. It's a signaling molecule. It's a molecule that's naturally produced inside the body. It's produced inside the cells that line all blood vessels throughout the body, our endothelial cells. And it's what regulates blood flow and perfusion of all tissues, cells, and organs throughout the body. But it's also important. It's what regulates oxygen delivery. So without nitric oxide, you don't get oxygen and nutrient delivery, and you don't, tissues fail. So it's really the loss of nitric oxide is the earliest event in the onset and progression of chronic disease. But people don't understand that it's a gas, and it's a gas. When it's produced, it's gone in less than a second. So that's created some challenges in developing safe and effective therapeutics, drugs on nitric oxide, or even supplementation or food or nutrients. So I've spent, 20 years in academia and basic science, and we've solved that riddle. So we've figured out how to deliver safe and effective amounts of nitric oxide. And it's not giving the body precursors, we're actually generating authentic nitric oxide gas. So that makes us different than any other product on the market.
Gotcha. And so we talked about the importance of nitric oxide, and so why would most people be lacking it? What are the reasons that it's an issue?
Yeah, well, the body makes nitric oxide through two primary pathways. Number one is through an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase that converts arginine to nitric oxide. And the older we get, based on diet and lifestyle, then that enzyme becomes dysfunctional. So there's this age-related decline in nitric oxide production through that pathway, and that's what's responsible for age-related disease. Mm-hmm. So there's some genetic predispositions, but it's mainly diet and lifestyle. And then the other pathway is through our diet, primarily through eating green leafy vegetables and the conversion of nitrate to nitrite and nitric oxide. So the reason people are deficient is because they develop endothelial dysfunction, they don't eat enough green leafy vegetables that contain nitrate, they're using mouthwash to disrupt the oral nitrate-reducing bacteria, or they're using antacids. Mm-hmm. And so all of that disrupts nitric oxide. The other thing is smoking, sedentary lifestyle, basically just some normal lifestyle choices people make lead to nitric oxide deficiency.
Gotcha. And so in terms of understanding, if we are deficient in nitric oxide, it's typically done through a proxy or the health conditions people end up with.
That's right. So nitric oxide is a gas with a half-life of less than 1 second, so we can't detect it in vivo. So what we do is we look for these proxies, these oxidative metabolites of nitric oxide. We can measure it in the blood in the research lab. I developed some salivary test strips years ago, so you can apply some saliva to the end of a test strip, and if you're depleted, it'll tell you. If you're normal, it'll tell you. It'll turn a bright pink. So that's kind of how we measure it. And that's a good tool to have in your toolbox, but we rely more on symptoms. So if you have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure, that's typically a nitric oxide problem. If you have sexual dysfunction, male or female, that's a nitric oxide problem. If you have exercise intolerance and you're unable to maintain an exercise regimen, then that's nitric oxide deficiency.
Gotcha. So in terms of supplementation, so I've personally in the past used things like L-arginine or citrulline, right, but I've used that in conjunction with certain types of training. But I understand you have products that are just delivering directly
That's right.
the nitric. So can you explain actually how that's delivered? Because I purchased some of the tablets,
yeah,
and it sort of dissolves, and then I guess the idea is you just ingest it, and then you get that into your system, right?
Yeah, so the lozenge is designed to, when it's falling apart, it's generating NO gas. So we can detect it, we can quantify it. It's about 30 to 40 parts per million NO gas coming off of that lozenge as it's dissolving. So it's absorbed in the oral cavity. We can see dilation of blood vessels typically within about 10 to 15 seconds from placing the lozenge in your mouth. So that's how that works. And then we basically, so if your body can't make nitric oxide, we do it for you. Mm-hmm. And then we also put technology in that tablet that recouples or fixes the enzyme in the lining of the blood vessel. So then we're basically restoring your body's own ability to make this molecule. So, but the problem with arginine and citrulline-based products is it's not ever a deficiency in arginine to make nitric oxide. If you have endothelial dysfunction, that means that if you're nitric oxide deficient, it means your body's lost the ability to convert arginine to nitric oxide. So taking arginine supplements is like putting gas in a car with a blown-up engine. You're not out of fuel, your engine's broken.
Right.
So we figured that out a long time ago, that you don't need arginine because your body makes it from the breakdown of proteins that you eat from your diet, and it's produced through the urea cycle. So your body makes enough arginine to bind to the nitric oxide synthase enzyme, so there's no need to supplement.
Gotcha. And I got to catch your presentation here at the conference, and you had, I love when I learn new things, because I hear about nitric oxide, and I was like, oh, I've done stuff with breath work, and you talk about nasal breathing. So how much nitric oxide is actually produced how much can I produce on my own, just if let's say I do certain types of breathing, or I do mouth taping when I sleep? Is that an adequate amount? Is it
Well, that's dependent upon the function of the enzyme.
Okay.
So the nitric oxide synthase enzyme. So if you have what's called endothelial dysfunction, meaning that the nitric oxide synthase enzyme isn't working in the endothelial cells, then it's not working in the epithelial cells. So you can practice the nasal breathing, the deep breathing, but until you fix the function of that enzyme, you're not going to generate any nitric oxide. And we've done this. You can test this in young kids and have them nasal breathe, and you can detect a lot of nitric oxide. But the older you get, the less nitric oxide you're making through the epithelial cells in the airway. So what we have to do then is fix that enzyme, which we know how to do, and then when you can practice the nasal breathing or the deep breathing, then you're actually going to generate more nitric oxide.
Gotcha. And another thing I learned was the fact that we produce nitric oxide, but it also gets added back to saliva. If you basically use it to help break. So that was something I did not understand. I learned at your talk. So if you can share a little bit about how that process works.
Yeah, there's two ways. So nitric oxides, when it's produced, it's oxidized primarily to nitrite and nitrate. These are the oxidative end products. But through our diet, we're consuming nitrate primarily through green leafy vegetables. So when we eat spinach or kale or arugula or beets, for example, 90 minutes after we consume that, our body takes the nitrate, takes it up in the gut, and concentrates it in our salivary glands. So now for the next 6 hours, each time we salivate, the bacteria are reducing the nitrate to nitrite and nitric oxide. So we're generating nitric oxide in the oral cavity. When we swallow our saliva, we're generating nitric oxide in the lumen of the stomach. So that's a way to continuously deliver nitric oxide over a period of several hours. And that's the benefits of a plant-based diet or green leafy vegetables that you'll get for the next 6 to 8 hours. The problem with that is you lose those benefits if you use mouthwash, if you have fluoride in your toothpaste or fluoride in your drinking water, or you're using antacids. So you completely eliminate the benefits of that.
Gotcha. And another thing I learned was the fact that if you actually eat healthy and organic, you're actually not going to get as much nitric oxide. It's a paradox, right? Because the soil, everything we don't have enough. You can't get it from the plants that are grown organically versus fertilized plants.
That's right. So I think it's important that you source your crops from. It's not organic is good because you're not getting the herbicides and pesticides, but they're deficient in a lot of nutrients and minerals. Number one being nitrate, and then you need nitrogen to assimilate other nutrients like vitamin A and selenium and chromium and things like that. So I think we have to add nitrogen-based fertilizer to the soil to allow these plants to grow and assimilate other nutrients. But you have to make sure that you're not getting the GMOs and the herbicides and the pesticides on it. So it's a balance, and people, a lot of times, it's cool and chic to eat organic, but a lot of times you cannot get enough nitrate from organically grown vegetables, so you almost have to supplement.
So if you want to eat well and eat organically, you're saying that is the way to go, but you have to know that in the back. You have to still supplement to get the adequate levels.
That's right. Or you find some producers who don't sell organic vegetables because they're adding nitrogen and doing the soil testing, but they completely eliminate the use of herbicides or pesticides. So you're getting the best of both worlds. And there's a couple of those out there. The best one I found is the Chef's Garden in Ohio. They produce the highest quality, nutritious, nutrient-dense vegetables of anybody in the world.
I learned so many things in your talk. It's pretty cool. And with regards to supplementing NO, like you had shown some slides showing how someone had some existing damage, like vascular damage or
Right.
damage, and so it's like taking and having that supplemental nitric oxide actually seemed to like not just open up and vasodilate, but actually over time can reverse some conditions like like you've got so it's not just like it's going to open up your arteries and veins and everything and then closes all back down. It's actually healing. And
No, that's right. It's self-renewing. And so the problem with people with chronic disease is they have inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction. Those are the hallmarks of every single chronic disease. And that results from loss of nitric oxide. So if you restore the production of nitric oxide, you suppress the inflammation, you suppress the oxidative stress, and you eliminate the immune dysfunction, and the body heals itself.
that's really
And
cool.
then we can actually produce or restore the body's own ability to make nitric oxide.
Yeah, so now I'm wearing my, self-experimenter hat, and I'm like, okay, if I'm going to start setting up some experiments, because I did purchase some of your product,
Okay.
the lozenges, because I was like, okay, because how do I assess? We talked about test strips. I don't know if it necessarily gives you a number versus you're just good or bad.
Right.
Is that kind of how
It's a semi-quantitative scale. There are numbers to it that correlate with certain millimolar concentrations found in the saliva.
Okay. So if I instead looked at proxies, like I check my blood pressure, I look at certain metabolic markers, like as of before or current state,
Yep.
how long would it take for me to start seeing effects as I start using these supplemental nitric oxide?
Well, I think it depends on the endpoint. So, for instance, for blood pressure, if you have an elevation in blood pressure, within 20 minutes we'll see your blood pressure start to drop. I've got a number of patents on methods of reducing triglycerides, methods of reducing C-reactive protein, so we can normalize the inflammation. We correct for some dyslipidemia problems. And then the other is kind of performance, exercise performance. So, for instance, if I take it before I go to the gym, and I typically do the same 20 or 30-minute cardio workout, and then I'll do resistance training. And if you take it, you can see the perceived exertion is much less. So you can get through the same type of exercise regimen with much less perceived exertion.
That's pretty cool, actually.
But I don't know how you quantify that.
Yeah, because perceived exertion. There would be no difference though in terms of like output of strength or like would that be a measurable?
Yeah, well, you can look at like the anaerobic threshold for endurance or aerobic exercise. You can look at time to fatigue on these high intensity interval training regimens. We've done clinical trials on that. So we seem to affect, and then if you want to get really technical and biochemical, you can look at oxygen utilization and look at ATP and ADP ratios and muscle biopsies.
Gotcha. So if I'm going to set up these experiments, get my baseline, find some proxies, I start supplementing, and let's say I notice a significant change, let's say to my baseline blood pressure. Let's use that as a marker. At what point, is there a point where I no longer need to supplement with it?
In an ideal world, no one needs to supplement, right? Because we're getting all the nutrients we need from our vegetables, and we live in a clean, pristine environment with no EMFs, with no glyphosate. The problem is, and there's clear evidence out of MIT that there's glyphosate in most of the foods we eat, and that shuts down and kills the enzyme that makes nitric oxide. There's clear evidence now of EMFs disrupting those certain frequencies that'll disrupt nitric oxide production. So in a perfect world, no. In the world we live in, you almost have to supplement because we're missing a lot of nutrients in our diet, so we have to supplement trace minerals and nutrients. Everything we're bombarded with in the environment and our food is disrupting nitric oxide production, so we almost have to supplement that in order to keep the body working in an optimal condition.
And just to shift gears a bit, so you also use the same compounds like in like skincare products,
Yeah.
which is also really interesting. I mean, that was. Can you explain like the mechanism of action, like why it's important to or beneficial to use it in like a skin cream or?
Sure. So just like any other organ, if you can't get blood flow to the sex organs, they fail. Right? If you can't get blood flow to the heart, you get heart disease, heart failure, and you die. If you don't get blood flow to the brain, it fails.
Yeah.
Well, the skin is an organ, just like all the others. If you can't get enough blood flow to the skin, then what happens? You lose hydration, you lose collagen, fine lines and wrinkles appear, you get age spots, and you start to get dermatitis and even acne.
Yeah.
So our thought was, well, we know how to make nitric oxide, we can apply this topically. And so when you apply it topically, you basically perfuse the small blood vessels of the dermis. We've got 4 published clinical trials. We see an improvement in collagen deposition. We see hydration of the dermal cells. We see fine lines and wrinkles disappear, age spots disappear. So it's basically just getting the cells of the skin the oxygen and nutrients they need so they can perform their function. And we also see an improvement in cellular turnover. So that you get now the old cells slough off, you get new cells that maintain their barrier function, and everything works better.
And could it also be used like because it's very localized, like if there's any sort of injury or any sort of trauma, it could be used to get more blood flow to that area?
Yeah, so we're basically taking our nitric oxide technology across multiple market space across the globe. So we think skincare and beauty is obviously an obvious space because a lot of people spend a lot of money on vanity and skincare, and we have a product unlike any other. But I've got a drug company called Nitric Oxide Innovations where we have drug applications using that same topical for healing diabetic ulcers, pressure ulcers. We can use it for surgical site infections. Really any wound, doesn't matter what the etiology of it is. To heal a wound, you got to do two things. You got to kill the infection and get blood flow to the site of the wound. And the nitric oxide topical that we've created does both. Kills the infection and causes an increase in blood flow to the wound to where you get wound healing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I think we covered a lot about nitric oxide. I think hopefully everyone here has a better understanding of it. I think they'll want to go get more information. So like, where can they find out more about you, your background, your company, the products, the research?
Yeah, so I've got an educational website that's just mainly education. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but it's drnathansbryan.com. It's Nathan S as in Scott, Bryan.com. There's a 6-minute video on there that'll teach you everything really you need to know about nitric oxide. I'm on Instagram, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, LinkedIn. This topical, the skincare product is n101.com. And yeah, I think you can search me and find my products all over. But my job is to educate and inform, and so people can make informed decisions about the best products to buy.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to doing my own experiments with your products, and then hopefully I'll be sharing my results and insights. Yeah. So thank you so much for your time. It's been great, and it's been a great conference. So it's been a long 2 days, but hopefully you can all make it to the next one if you haven't been to one before. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.